All right. Hello and welcome to the Bokeh and Mocha Podcast. I'm, of course, Griff, joined with Christopher
Hello.
and Abigail, our technical director behind the scenes at the board. You might notice that Genevieve is not here. Unfortunately, she came down with something, and we'd rather not have her be patient zero or anything like that kind of thing. So
Absolutely.
so it's just Chris and I for this episode of the Bokeh and Mocha Podcast. Of course, if you're new here, we are photographers, three different photographers of three different experience levels. Christopher, 15 plus years of experience in the professional photography industry. Myself, a 5-year experienced photographer, hobbyist, amateur, transitioning into professional photography. And Jen is our up and coming first year learning the new craft. And we like to talk about photography over coffee, and hence
hmm
the Bokeh and Mocha podcast. And we are going to basically go over kind of the ins and outs, the philosophies of photography, and also the technical side of things and the artistic side of things. And today is a very technical one
hmm
because today we are talking about the exposure triangle, the 101 of photography.
Absolutely. I mean, everything pretty much comes into an exposure triangle. One of the things that we'll be discussing is what you see on the screen here. This is how we can change our
Mm-hmm.
three pyramid versions
Mm-hmm.
of the exposure to benefit our exposure to what we want. So we have our aperture, we have our shutter, and we have our ISO. Some of the things, and we'll get really into the nitty gritty on each of our segments today over each one. The first one we're going to talk about is our ISO.
Mm-hmm.
This is typically your first setting that you would do when you get onto
Mm-hmm.
your location for your shoot. Um, when we talk about each one of these segments, we're also going to talk about when you change one setting, how it affects the way the picture can be taken, and what you need to do to compensate for that.
The best analogy that I can think of is if you've seen that picture online of, do you want when a job is done, do you want quality, do you
Uh-huh.
want it quick, and do you want it cheap? But you can
Uh-huh.
only choose two.
Yep.
So whatever you pick to compensate is going to affect the other two that you're going with.
Yep. And that's precisely what we're going to be doing with this triangle as well. So with this, we have the three main pillars.
Mm-hmm.
ISO, which for those who are in film know what that actually means. That
Mm-hmm.
was your image speed or your film speed that you
Yep.
could have. Then you have your aperture. This is how big or small the shutter aperture is set to.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, your shutter speed, how fast that shutter can be able to go.
Mm-hmm.
With the ISO, back in the old film days, we had the system set up where we would have to actually choose the film speed before we would actually go out in the field.
Mm-hmm.
And if you had 24 images in the film and you didn't use all of it, you had 24 images you had to use up pretty quickly on that
Yeah.
film speed. So we learned a lot on how to adjust to what our ISO was.
Mm-hmm.
If we go back towards the actual image as a large image, we'll focus on the bottom of the triangle. Our ISO, we have a very wide range of what we can choose from.
Mm-hmm.
For the system, from what I do, I don't use anything in an automatic form.
Mm-hmm.
I use everything in manual. So I start at ISO 100. This is going to pretty much let in the least amount of light
Mm-hmm.
that goes into the system.
Mm-hmm.
However, it's going to be the clearest.
Mm-hmm.
We won't have any digital noise created by that.
Yeah.
So for outside, this is phenomenal during the middle of the day,
Mm-hmm.
bright sunny skies, all that kind of stuff. We have a very little amount of light, but yet we don't have any noise in there.
Mm-hmm.
If you go inside between 400 and 800 ISO, this is going to be a better system for that, just because that gets you more light coming into the camera, but yet you're going to start creating some digital noise.
Yeah. Now, speaking of digital noise, so if I remember correctly, ISO on a digital camera, which is what we all shoot on, it's going to be the digital compensation that your camera fills in, basically, to try and finish out the image because it doesn't have enough light to finish out that image.
That is correct. So the digital noise is it's this creation of something that doesn't actually exist there. Some people call it artifacting as well. Some people like myself will use that artifact to our advantage, especially if we're doing things like astrophotography. We can bring that ISO level way high because you're taking pictures of white dots is what you're exposing against a black sky. So if you're taking a picture of that and it creates an extra 20 or 30,000 additional pixels in there that of an abundant light, you can't really tell the difference. If I take the same exposure level of, we'll say, I use around 12,000 ISO occasionally when I'm doing my astrophotography. If I brought that and took a picture of you, we'd tell the difference because it will be pixelated out and we'll see errors throughout the system.
Now, on the flip side of that, I like using automatic ISO when I'm doing street photography because I like going for that more granular, almost vintage look when I'm doing street portraiture, not portraiture, but street photography. I'm capturing kind of those moments there, just in the moment, and I want to make sure that my depth of field is correct with my f-stop or my aperture, and I also want to be able to freeze the movement with a higher shutter speed. So I'll let that ISO get up there if I need to, because it also adds for that kind of vintage feel, like I went back in time and caught like like something from the olden days, if you will.
Well, yeah, and that's mainly because when you got the old film ones, you could get the cheaper film was ISO 800, and that was just the standard when you went and got the point and shoot cameras, the little disposable ones. They usually came between ISO 600 and ISO 800, so you're going to get some of that grainy look to it. You would get your expensive film, that was the ISO 400, the 200, and the 100. So for you, that's where you can get a lot of that. And another advantage of doing the street photography with the automatic ISO is you can change your shutter and your aperture, and your ISO is going to move to keep your exposure. I've always been the one where I keep everything manual because I control how I want for my exposure. So when we have a properly exposed image, what we talk about means that the light is exactly what it should be for an exposure. The depth of field should be what it needs for the exposure, and the clarity is what you would need for the exposure. All three of those is what makes up the perfect exposure.
You want to find that sweet spot between all of them.
Correct.
And whatever you change on one is going to affect the other two.
Now there's some in an artistic style, like for instance, if I'm taking pictures of a sunset, I don't want a perfectly exposed sunset because we lose color. I want to underexpose my image by at least one full stop underexposing. So understanding the exposure triangle means you can manipulate all three of your settings to be able to create that. Even though it's not a perfectly exposed image, you're bringing it down to what you would need. And a lot of that also comes from our aperture as well. And one of the big things that we work with all the settings is they benefit each other. In ISO, the biggest thing we have to really pay attention to is particularly how much exposure, how much light we want into the camera. So if I'm outside and I want a daytime picture, like your street photography, instead of having auto ISO, if I keep it at an ISO 400, I'm going to allow the correct amount of light coming in while still introducing some of that data or that old style
grain if
grain
you will.
to it. But if you bump it up to 800, you can manipulate with your other settings to make that expose and still keep that old grainy style photo without having your automatic ISO behind the fact.
For me, and because I'm only like 5 years into photography too, I mean, it just became easier for me to just throw the ISO onto automatic and just use everything else on manual kind of thing. So
Well, I think we're gonna have to take a small little break here from ISO. When we come back from our break, I think you're gonna teach us about aperture. Is that correct?
I'll do my best.
Well, I mean, Aperture is always fun. We can do some really cool manipulations with it. And I look forward to hearing from that after this break.
Back to the Bokeh and Mocha Podcast. We are going to be talking about the exposure triangle. We're on the second part of the exposure triangle, which is, of course, aperture. Aperture is the size of your shutter that's inside of your camera. You can see it depicted on the left-hand portion of this exposure triangle graph there. And if you have your camera on and look down the lens, you would actually be able to see that shutter inside of your camera and how bigger or how much bigger it is or how much more small it is. And it works just like the iris of your eyeball, how you focus in and adjust to being able to see in the dark. Your pupils dilate a little bit more to allow in more light, and that's basically what the aperture does. The bigger or the more open that your aperture is, the more light that it allows to come in. The only thing, though, is that it also affects your depth of field as well. So, typically speaking, the human eye, as far as depth of field goes, is 35 millimeters is the closest to the depth of field that you're going to get to the human eye. I mean, when we look around the room now, admittedly, I am nearsighted, so certain things, certain things are a little bit more out of focus than others from across the room, but with the camera, because you have that manual manipulation of where you can control your aperture settings, will affect like what is. So this is where the term bokeh in the Bokeh and Mocha podcast comes into. If we're looking at this this shot of me on the screen here, we have that aperture set to where you'd be able to see this lovely wood panel background behind me while also I am still in focus and things like that. But if we widen our aperture, then that background is going to be more out of focus, and that causes like that nice little kind of blur effect behind someone during portraits.
Now, when you say widen the aperture, are we going up or down in numbers?
We're going down in numbers. That's the other thing that throws a lot of people off, is the lower your number, the more open your aperture is. Why that is, I have never been able to figure out, but that's apparently the case there. So, but yeah, for something like portrait photography, you can get away with an aperture, or an f-stop is what the numbers are referred to, is that's your focal length, if I remember correctly. Yep, your focal length is that f number, or that f-stop. So you can get away with like some f4, but ideally for portraiture, you want to be going down to like a 2.8 to 2. Christopher and I were talking off stream a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about the 85, which I absolutely love to shoot portraits with, is an 85. And the one that I have has a f2.1, I think, is what my f-stop is at on my 85. But him and I were also talking about, there was I bought a pretty budget lens with that one, and I think that one only cost me about maybe $500-$600 or so.
Versus the art lens.
The art lens, yeah, the art lens, which was about $2,000, but it had a buttery aperture of like 1.2 or something like that.
Yep, 1.2, which is incredible. But it'll create that depth of field that I'm trying to find from the art, because I want to use it more as a macro style lens, and that's what it's designed for.
Exactly. And when I pointed out that some of the reviews that I saw on that particular lens, sometimes the bokeh would affect the person as well too. Like the bokeh would start at like the person's ears and like blur those out, so all you were getting was just a clear face, and then everything else was.
I mean, but coming from an artistic point of view, that would be kind of cool.
It would be pretty cool, yes.
Like they're coming through a portal.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you were saying one of the things you're trying to do is cosplay photography, correct?
Yep.
So something like that would be phenomenal. They've come through a portal.
Yep. Or with the flash, like have a little bit of motion blur, even though they're standing still, or something like that. That'd be pretty fun. I'm not gonna lie. Don't convince me to lay down another $2,000 here. Okay, we're trying to save money. We're trying to budget.
Oh yes. Yeah. So that's the downside of photography. We can both spend so much money on so many things, but yet we need to keep our budget.
Yeah, exactly. So, but yeah, aperture is to sum up. It's going to be how much light you're letting in, but it also is going to affect your focal distance. So if you've got like foreground and background subjects as well too, that's also going to be affected by your f-stop. So if if you've got a subject that's I don't know, say for example like cheering to the camera or something like that, and you would have this be out of focus, but their face is in focus and their background is in focus. That's all going to be affected.
You mean effectively what we just had on the camera?
Because now, there's your bokeh right there.
Yeah, well, it's showing your so your point of field is what you're actually showing. If I'm not mistaken, the lens that we actually have on that camera is your 85.
It is my 85. It is my baby.
I believe we're actually running close to an f3 or an f4 for that. So just by showing your arm length, that's the difference of your depth of field that we're pulling for. Yeah. Whereas if we switch to the other camera that's in front of me, this one, we actually have it set to where it's a different depth of field focus, because the way the background is behind me, we need a little more focus range for it. So we're sitting more at an f6 and f7, which gives us a wider depth of field. So when we're doing, for me, nature photography, if I want to be able to show like the Great Plains, I would want to have not a depth of field that would be really close to the camera, but all the way across. So I'd bring that aperture level all the way
F11,
up.
I think, is what I hear for a lot of landscape photography.
But then that drives into what I can build doing a shutter speed. And that's what we're going to be working on next, is shutter speed. Because now I got to let in a different amount of light to be able to get what I want to be able to do to have that depth of field.
Yep. Okay, and we'll go ahead and talk about shutter speed up next on the Bokeh and Mocha Podcast. Okay, and welcome back to the Bokeh and Mocha Podcast, part 3 of the shutter triangle, and this is a big one. This one is shutter speed. So, Chris, we've got a landscape portrait, or not a landscape portrait, but a landscape photo that we're setting up here. We have our aperture at 11, so we can make sure that we get both foreground, background, and midground all in perfect clarity. We've got our ISO, let's say down to 100 because we're shooting outside. We have that little extra range to be able to do it. So what do we do with our shutter speed?
Well, see, that's a great question to ask. Now, what we've been showing on this image for the entire episode is this exposure triangle, and precisely what you're bringing up is one of the things that we talk about. To make a perfectly exposed image, if we're at an ISO 100, we'd take that line, go all the way across until it intersects with our f11 going towards. So on here, if we go up from the 100 to the f11 point, and where that point meets, we draw a line straight across to where the shutter speed is. That would then show us that our shutter speed needs to be 1/15 of a second to create a perfectly exposed image. By changing our shutter speed, we can be able to actually make that image darker. So if we're doing a landscape image, like a sunset, we might want to bring it darker. We can be able to then take that intersecting line and change it all the way down our shutter speed. So if we're at 1/80th of a second, we can be able to still capture all of that in a little darker exposure. Now, the problem with shutter speed is it's how fast that shutter clicks, how long that essentially the film, or today's day, the processor, is exposed to that light. If we have it exposed for a longer period of time, we're going to get this motion effect, which can be really cool if you're taking pictures of something that's in motion, such as an airplane prop. A lot of people like to be able to have pictures of airplanes. If you take it with a very fast shutter speed and the prop is completely frozen in time and you have no motion in there, it looks like it's a model just hung up on a string and sitting there. So you have a little bit of motion blur in that airplane prop to show it's actually flying through the air. Or a car, you'd want to have some motion in the car. If you're doing something that everybody loves, I'm assuming you're one of these people too, waterfalls. you can be able to take the exact same image of the same waterfall and have two completely different effects to it. The first one being in motion, you're letting the water cascade across that image time, so you have a long exposure time. You can even have 5-6 seconds. You get this smooth white, almost like a effect that you've drawn on there. Or if you have it at 2,000th of a second, you can be able to stop that water mid-motion and be able to see the water droplets in the image. It creates two completely different emotions to that image, whether it's this tranquil, peaceful style versus the awe of a waterfall being in the complete stopped point. Because when you go out to see a waterfall, your eyes can't be able to freeze frame the water that quickly. And that's where the effect of the camera can really drive that. With an exposure triangle, we learned this in photography not because the fact that that's the only right answer. It's to better manipulate light. That's all we're doing. As you said in one of our previous episodes, is photography is just drawing with light. This gives us the tools as a painter would, or as a clay would from a modeler, to be able to manipulate that light in a way. And shutter is just one of the ones that we can use.
You got to basically learn the rules before you break them.
Exactly.
In a way.
Exactly. One of the big things too with the exposure triangle, the way we brought it into here is actually how I set up whenever I do a shoot. First step, set my ISO for my scene that I'm working with. Am I inside? Am I outside? Am I doing astrophotography? Am I doing portrait? That determines what ISO I'm going to sit at. Being from the old film era, I always say old film, we still have some of it around. We would be locked into whatever our ISO number would be. So I'm always used to locking in my ISO for that setting. Then I'd go to aperture. What do I want for my depth of field? What do I want for the amount of light that's coming in? And that would then give me the answer for what we would have for the shutter speed. And then the shutter speed gives me that fine-tuned manipulation of how I want that image to actually look in camera, making it easier when I go into post-processing that I don't have to do as much editing to the photo because I've done it in that camera itself.
Now, talking about astro and landscape photography, so we have like a long depth of field, f11, we'll say. So we're letting in very little light. It's also getting a little dark out, so we're maybe nudging our ISO maybe up to about 400 or so, give or take, like we're shooting indoors in a way. So we'll need to slow that shutter speed down in order to let in enough light. And this is where your old friend, the tripod, will come in handy as well, too, because the thing that you also have to kind of remember, too, and especially with focal lengths, and me like shooting with prime lenses, because I shoot, 35, 50, 85, and then I have a 24 that I use for wide sky shots and big landscape shots. But typically speaking, my shutter speed should not be, I think if I remember correctly, slower than the actual
focal length.
Yes, that's the word I was looking for.
Yes.
It's definitely
there's two rules of thumb to go by. Number one, your shutter speed should never go below your focal length that you're shooting. So if you're shooting an 85 millimeter, and this only goes for non-cropped cameras. Keep that in mind. All focal lengths are designed for full frame cameras. So whereas yours is a full frame, the other one we were showing earlier is not. It's a crop sensor. So our focal length is different. Different rules apply for that. But your shutter speed shouldn't go lower than that because of how much your hands move. The other rule
what are you
of thumb,
talking about? My hands are steady.
Yeah, exactly. It's steady as a rock. The other rule of thumb is any focal length, even a 35 millimeter, don't go lower than 1/80th of a second because you can still get some of that motion. When you're looking in the camera, you won't see it. As soon as you put it on your computer, you'll see it. So one of the things that we were always told is if you're going to be shooting it in handheld, try to keep it at 1/100th or 1/125th. And then you'll on any lens that you use, and then you'll pretty
any
much
slower you want to put it on a tripod.
or a gimbal stabilizer or anything of that nature as well.
Yeah.
Some of the gimbals, now we've got those nice handheld gimbals, you can be able to get down to about 1/30th of a second and still hand hold it, because the gimbal takes out all that shake through there.
Yeah.
But then again, below that, your whole motion will then come through.
Yeah. But at the same time, though, I mean, for $12, you can get a pretty decent tripod too.
Oh yeah, yeah. I think we have an episode coming up on really each of these equipments and everything, and how to keep things under a budget as well.
Yeah. But there you go. That is, of course, the exposure triangle. And again, we could go even more in depth on each of these things. This is just an overview on this. If you have any questions, by all means, leave comments on where you are listening to this podcast, or on YouTube, or anything like that. And we'll definitely be able to go ahead and read them and answer them. We might put together a little question episode at some point.
Yep.
And whatnot. But until then, keep shooting, keep sharing. Thanks for listening to the Bokeh and Mocha Podcast.